Friday afternoon, folks, 4 o'clock here in Honolulu, actually 6 o'clock in California, where one of our guests is standing by. Ted Ralston here, your host on Where the Road Leads. Welcome to 2015. Welcome to our program. Thanks for coming back to start the year off with us. We're going to talk about where the road leads in 2015, which is anywhere but clear. And as you know from past experience, this program is totally defined by the quality and the insight and the creativity and the mental acuity of its guests. And I'd like to turn first to introduce our first guest right here in the studio. That would be Jay Fidell, sitting right next to me.
Hi, Ted. Happy New Year.
Same to you, Jay. Happy New Year to you. And we have in California, up in San Francisco, John Mullen of Promia Incorporated, standing by, ready to join our conversation.
Hello, Happy New Year.
Okay, and John does have a Hawaiian shirt on. If you can notice, look closely and you'll find a pattern there. We do understand. So what we thought we'd talk about is, based on what we did for 9 months last year in this program, Jay, talking about a lot of things that came up that where technology intersects with the problem space that we face or is provided to us and the human condition that emerges from all that. Talk about how that might go forward in 2015. See if we can find some points of high interest, things that are going to come at us that we can predict and begin doing some programming associated with that to try to give people some awareness, some insight, and a place to dig in, a place to enter that kind of a conversation.
All right, Ted, I want to give you two possibilities that maybe you could moderate a discussion
Okay.
of. Okay. I'm not sure which one is the first and which one is the second, but I think there is probably a flow between the two of them. The first, I guess, this is in order of it coming to mind. The first one is that we are, as far as technology is concerned, right now, we are in the Third World War. It's happening. And if it wasn't clear before the North Korea incident 2 weeks ago, it's got to be coming clear now. And we were not aware that either Korea could knock out Sony or that the U.S. could knock out North Korea.
Or that our response, we hadn't even practiced a response to what happens if we get attacked. So we hadn't practiced it even.
True. But, it makes it clear, though, that these are not kids anymore. Or they may be kids, but they're sophisticated kids. My theory, by the way, is that they work in cells. The governments of these rogue countries like North Korea pay them and give them instructions on what to do and give them the technology on what to do. It's not just the army of North Korea. It's a bunch of kids, too, who are real smart. And Korea has been building this team for a while, North Korea. Anyway, so, a few years ago, a utility in Texas ordered circuit boards from China for their utility, systems control. And the circuit boards came back and worked fine, but there was a little extra board, a rider on the board that was not in the design that they had sent to China. It was a little extra something that somebody in China put on that board.
Just because it was a good idea.
It seemed like a good idea to somebody, but we don't know exactly what it's intended to do. And it was on 60 Minutes. I'm not kidding about this. And the great concern that it was a Helen of Troy kind of thing, a Trojan horse, if you will, where somebody could control that circuit board through the internet by remote control. I mean, and the world is full of the Internet of Things now. I mean, Lord knows every day how all our lives are subject to, using the internet and controlling the devices in our lives by the internet. And all of that is now clear that all of that can be compromised. Plus all the computer systems directly, the servers and the where the programs run. So I'm thinking that if you look at the next war as a cyber war, we're in it already. It's happening. And just as easily as knocking out North Korea for a few hours, we could have knocked them out forever. And just as easy for them to knock out Sony, they could have knocked out Wall Street the same way. Of course, it's a matter of timing, and it's a matter of strategy, and you don't just throw all your marbles, into the pit right away. You sequence your moves, but I suggest, on the one hand, that there is a war going on now, and it could have disastrous effects. The thing about it is, if you knock out a city, everything in that city, it's not games. It's not like, tomorrow things return to normal. People will die. Many people will die.
So what you're saying, Jay, is that we've become totally dependent on this underlying cyber network that
It's more than
causes-
that. I'm saying not only have we become dependent on it, but that there's a body of bad people out there who would use it in order to attack others. And if we weren't sure of that till now, we should be quite sure now.
Let's turn to John.
That's one point.
Okay,
One
let's,
point.
can we hold that thought?
We can
Because that's
hold the
such an
second point
important
till
thought,
later.
because it underlies everything that we're dealing with. I mean, every transaction we make is in some way connected to the internet, in
Right.
some way affected by cybersecurity. John, you heard what Jay said. From your perspective and knowing what you do for a living and where you see the future heading towards, what's your comment and reaction to what Jay just opened up for us?
Well, I agree 100%. We have been working with it for many years, and it's actually been happening for a long time. But now it's becoming a little bit more direct and common. So it's something that's a little more observable now. It's been happening for a number of years. And it's not just the internet. People believe that you have to come in through the network. There's two other very serious ways, and you're seeing some of it in the press about Sony, where there's some suspicion anyway of some of the insider threat personnel. And then as we see from other types of attacks, you can introduce programs into things like USB drives and give them to the workers, and they go into their job and they use them. And even if their network is not touching the internet at all, in any way, place, shape, or form, you can introduce bad things into their systems and cause their turbines to overrun and blow them up and things like this without ever having a network connection. So there's different ways and in different situations, and it's not easy.
This is sort of like an extreme extrapolation of the intelligence war that developed and took place during World War II, where intelligence basically was what was used to determine and establish the outcome of the conflict.
Exactly. Exactly.
So how do we observe the specifics of this emerging World War III, the cyber war? How do we detect? How do we become sensitive to? How do we think about our own personal exposure?
Your question assumes that we are not sensitive to it, and I think that's a correct assumption. One of the things that came up in Sony was that they had been hacked for a while and didn't know it. They were not sophisticated in their systems to deal with.
And that's Sony.
hack.
That's like the top of the technology chain.
Well, that's ironic, but the fact is they were way behind the curve. They were complacent about it, if not arrogant about it. And
Yes.
so they didn't really pay attention. They thought that nobody would do this to them. But my point only is that your question assumes that we are not sensitive, and I think that's true. We are not sensitive, either in our attitude or our technology. I don't think we have the technology on a grand scale. I mean, certain intelligence organizations can be more sensitive than others, but on a grand scale, I don't think people have a way to determine if they're being hacked. And so unless you have a consultant come in, maybe somebody like John, and take a look and put some special software in there and examine what's happening, you won't have a clue. So in general, if you're looking on a daily basis for the status of, quote, the war, end quote, how is the war going today? Nobody knows how the war is going today until a city goes down, then you know.
John, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think two things. I agree with him from the point of view of consumers don't know. I'm glad to say, have some awareness and knowledge of some of the intelligence services that we've had for many years, and thankfully they are much more aware and more cognizant, although there's always room for improvement, but I'm glad to say I'm not as afraid as I would be. How's that? But yeah, as far as consumers go, and I think a lot of it is, the majority of the world is so interconnected. Most of our people that we consider to be our enemies are also, in many ways, working together on trade or other things. And if they demolish our financial system, it will hurt them as much as it hurts us. In most cases. Unless you're talking about somebody who's living in the year 1000 in a cave somewhere and who wants everyone to be there. Those are the real threats, if it were, because other countries, even North Korea to a point, it needs the money. I mean, they're desperate, right? So demolishing a economic structure of another country will hurt them a lot more than it'll hurt us, really.
That's interesting. That then comes down to the point of observation, indications of things that are adverse or heading in that direction. But that all requires education so that we all as individual citizens can become aware of where those points are that might indicate some malfeasance going on, so we can start taking some action to do something.
Well, I think, as John said, I mean, the intelligence agencies are going to have a much better handle on this, and probably the U.S. intelligence agencies are going to have the best handle of all on it. And we, the people, who are ultimately the victims, we really don't know, and we have to rely on our government and our intelligence agencies to tell us where we are. And in that regard, it's not only telling us where we are, but it's planning out the strategical steps. I referred to that earlier, and I think that this isn't something where you throw all your marbles in at once. You have to figure out which option to pick at a given time, which scenario to play off at a given time. And it's just like the Cold War. It's deterrence. You want to make them understand through either directly or indirectly that if they play with your city, you are going to play with their city, and everyone stands at deterrence.
And once again, that assumes we know who they are, which is an interesting
Good
problem.
point.
Let's do this. We talked at one of the last sessions in last year about getting some kind of a citizen experience that would give people a sense of what these issues mean. Let's take a short break here and come back and review that discussion, because what we're heading for is some kind of an education program, citizen experience, and I'd like to tie that to what we do with, say, tsunami preparation and such. It's all about preparation, and it's about training and awareness. So let's take our first break and come back in 30 seconds and explore that side of it if we can.
Aloha, I'm Kili'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the Think Tech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to Think Tech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the Think Tech Hawaii broadcast network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
Friday afternoon, folks. Ted Ralston here, your host on Where the Road Leads. We're talking about that road leading into 2015 after a lot of interesting discussion in 2014 on this area of the intersection between technology, the problem space, the problems we've been handed, and the human condition that emerges from the proper solutions in all this area. We've got Jay Fidell on as our guest, and John Mullen standing by on the Skype in San Francisco, California, giving us an external view, but is also an internal view because John deals through the window of cyber, and cyber underlies pretty much everything we're talking about. What we spoke of before the break was the awareness that Jay brought to us that there's a cyber interaction of some kind. Call it a war if you want, call it the skirmishes that precede a war, call it the positioning that we're seeing recently exemplified by the Sony attack and many others that's coming at us. And the concern we've got is that we all as individuals may not have a common shared awareness of what these threats are, how to observe them, how to test them, how to detect them, and then even if we could, what to do about them. We all have our our financial information available to us online and probably to others if we're not careful. And we have enough output of our information through social media and such that it seems like it's highly attackable. What we were speaking of before the break was that how do we take the kind of experience and the understanding we have, say, equivalent to what we do in tsunami preparation? How do we take the tsunami of cyber and bring that into the picture so that citizens can be aware of what a cyber issue looks like, just as they're aware of what a physical tsunami effort or issue looks like? Now, of course, in the tsunami, we have the sirens going off, but beyond that, we have the drawdown of the ocean and things like that that are clues to us to what's going to happen.
Well, I think there's two things. One is, can the individual person, citizen, participate in defending against, inherent in your question, defending against a cyber attack? It's not clear to me that he can. It's not clear to me. I mean, the only people who can really figure this out would be government with all those sophisticated tools and well-trained people. The average Joe, he's on the receiving end of things. He's not going to be able to do very much. I suppose he can get maybe there's going to be a new virus protector in town. That would, be an overarching.
Once a day, a new virus protector.
Yeah, right. I'm not sure that's going to make much difference. In fact, I doubt it will make much difference. I mean, if the backbone goes down, the backbone goes down. Your virus protectors.
So let's get back to the issue
second point.
Coming up with
the second point.
Okay.
Okay, is what you do, and I think this is what you were after, is what you do when the backbone does go down, and it's just like a tsunami. You better find self-reliance in your community and your society. That hospital, had better have its own power system. The grid ought to be able to operate, in a different way for critical functions. You're going to have to deal without the computers that have been brought down. And to save the society, you better be able to do that for a while. And I think that's much more important than the individual and whether he's able to get on Google on a given day.
There is a body of science called complex adaptive systems that tries to understand this and understands the pressure points and the soft points and this sort of thing. We've had Aubrey Yee on here talking about that at sort of like an entry level, and there's more to it than that, and John, I think, could take us in a direction. What I'm thinking of is that what we're thinking here about is that we do need a citizen experience. We do need the way for people to have at least the first level of awareness of something that's not right, just like they do in the case of the tsunami or other natural disasters. So maybe structured upon the excellent work that HARP has done here in Hawaii of getting awareness going in Waimanalo and Hau'ula and other areas, Manoa, maybe based on those existing and successful disaster fairs, we could think of attaching a cyber layer in some way, maybe get a grant from somebody to do a test to figure out how we can determine what people understand and how to generate the awareness for them.
What would it do?
I don't know. All I can do is state the observation that we need that, but some kind of a hacker activity of some kind that would let people understand how they may be subject to being hacked. John, what are your thoughts about some kind of a citizen experience that we could generate?
Well, first, I think the way we've kind of positioned it in the past with the military experiments, you first look for things, as you were saying, indications and warnings, and whether it's the consumer on the street or possibly the manager, his manager at a job, the corporation that work, the different commercial and government organizations, they can see different types of indications and warnings. This is before anything happens, and we'll kind of step through it. Before anything happens, as it's happening, and after it happens. And the first one is before, and I think you're right. Can the common man on the street see many indications and warnings? And it's like we said the other day, the Russian group. We all know that the Russians have very, very sophisticated mathematicians and hackers and Chinese, etc. But they're hurting right now from the oil situation, and they've basically warned that any more sanctions, they'll have some response. And one of their most, I guess, easiest responses could be a cyber response. So in that case, watching things like that on the world stage, you can kind of see where there could be some threats. But more importantly, would be at your job. There are laws, I know in every state and now federal laws too, that if there's an exposure at your job, whether it's customer information or employee information, it has to be disclosed immediately. First to the government and then also to the people involved. And then you also have to share it with other organizations so that they can become prepared. So there's a lot of work happening there. And that would be an early indication. Like Sony got hacked, well, they've already threatened that they can go after other media groups, et cetera. So those are early indications and warnings of rolling problems. And then what we recommend to people is, as far as their own consumer finances, is have a separate either low total credit card, so that if it gets taken, you lose only $1,000, et cetera, and you use that to buy things on the internet rather than a large account that could be tapped with a lot of money lost. Things like this to limit your exposure. And then at the end, how you do lessons learned and how you protect yourself. I think your ideas, the Hawaiian Islands are uniquely positioned because you've had to basically position your food, your power, your water, everything different than the U.S. continental, because you are exposed. Island to island. I mean, as we said before a couple sessions ago. So I think you probably are better prepared than a lot of people for some outages.
One thing you've said that turned me on to a different angle here is that if I'm engaged in cyber war, it isn't necessarily that I bring a city down. It isn't necessarily that I bring a country down. It isn't necessarily that I attack the military. I have a million possibilities. I can attack only certain people in certain ways, certain companies in certain ways. I can sit there at my consoles, 10,000 miles away and figure out what kind of joyful things I can do today. And that is hard to defend against, because you don't know, you have no clue where it's going to strike, and when it happens, you're not even sure that it really happened.
What John told us was that the indications and warnings are the aspect that precedes this. And if you take that just for a moment to the Sony experience, what I think John's saying is the Sony thing didn't happen all at once. There were clues and indications that were buried in their transactions or financial work and this sort of thing that were indicators that a pattern was occurring that was not of their own choosing. Is that a reasonable understanding, John? That
we talked in June 2011. Remember, they had some very serious attacks back 3 years ago because of something they did, a response legally to a young guy who had basically used one of their PlayStations as a computer, and they went to litigate against this young guy and made a lot of the anonymous group worldwide angry, and so they started targeting the Sony group, and that was 2011. And there's been indications since then. But this new one, we'll see how it works out as to how it certainly had some correlation with that previous event, but I'm not sure that was the entire motivation.
So there is a pattern awareness factor here that we have to begin thinking of, a state change from the daily interactions and thoughts we have to something above that, which none of us can quite see. Marty and I were talking about that the other night, and exactly how do we envision this issue. So envisioning it is step number one. The indications and warnings are the specificity that something is starting to happen. The pattern is the beginning to see the effect starting to show up. Those are the factors that occur here. Again, not unlike disease, not unlike a natural disaster. There are indications. Natural disasters are preceded by weather predictions or by other factors, depending what the origin of it is. International crises are predicted indications and warning-wise by financial issues, by military motion, by positioning and such. So coming up with a pattern and working into what that state is, the state that says we're now in a condition of risk.
Well, in terms of preparing yourself, in terms of dealing with it, it seems to me, and John, you'd be the expert on this, but if there's going to be...
You were set up as the foil, just in case you didn't.
If it was going to be an attack on, say, a company, then before that attack can happen, somebody has to get access into a critical part of the software or the data connection somehow. I don't know a lot how you do that, but The idea is that they have to get inside before they can do the damage. And so if you're akamai about it, then you will figure out a way to identify that somebody got inside. And so you're aware then, you have a greater sense of awareness and prevention if you can find a way to identify the intruder before the intruder does anything. And maybe in the future we'll have, more sophisticated ways to identify intrusions before any damage is done. The other thing that occurs to me, and John, again, you'd be the expert on this, is that we may need a whole global revamp of the way we do business on the internet in order to prevent mischief. Right now, you can do lots of things anonymously or under false names. But suppose I said, from now on, starting on the 3rd of January 2015, you can't use the internet. No signal can be sent unless we know exactly and we verify exactly where it came from. So you want to mess around, we can know who you are. Because right now I don't think we have that. Is it possible to have that, John?
We used to have it before TCP came along to make ARPANET, which then became the internet. We had it in the IBM mainframe networks that were much more specific as to who you are and what message you could send, et cetera. But the freedom, remember the internet was built on these university research, and the TCP model was built because it was so free. And as a matter of fact, even today, you get arguments around the world from the open foundations for freedom that want to negate any kind of control, As soon as you do what you had just suggested, somebody has to be in charge of defining that and administering that and enforcing that. And who is that going to be? You see, it's the same model back against the worldwide government. And you've got people saying we reject any control at all, which by definition immediately says we're embracing confusion, chaos, and insecure models.
Well, that's true. And it's a balancing act, isn't it? If I give you a system that is safe from cyber war, it may be worth paying that price as long as we make a system, where nobody will take advantage. But if you ask me who should run this, I'd say it should be Ted and you and me.
Well, the newer versions of the IPv6 has a much stronger, identification model, and there's new ways to do things. It's just moving the existing mass of business from the IPv4 world, which has this kind of non-deterministic sourcing. It's very hard. It's a lot of money to move things, but the Internet of Things.
Oh, we may have a technical cyber problem right here with, we got you frozen, John, in position here.
Because you're adding so many different robotic pieces, all the new Internet of Things on it. Are we there?
Yeah,
Hello?
let's take a bit of a break here and see if we can work the cyber problem on this end if we can, and we'll come back to this conversation in about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Aloha, I'm Hunter Hevlin, host of Sustainable Hawaii here at ThinkTech Hawaii. You can tune in every week on Thursday at 2 p.m. to see interviews with sustainability professionals from around the state and even further abroad, learning about activities with water management, food security, waste management, and a whole host of other fascinating opportunities to get engaged with making a greener island. So if you're interested in making the transition from consuming individuals to communities of producers, check us out every Thursday. Aloha.
Friday afternoon, folks. Ted Ralston here at downtown Honolulu studios of ThinkTech Hawaii with our show Where the Road Leads. We're talking about that road leading into 2015, into some very unspecific areas, but very significant areas that we starting to see emerge.
Yeah. The genie is out of the bottle.
The genie, yeah, we're not going to get that one back in. The chickens have left the barn or something like that. We have Jay Fidell on as a guest. As you know, this show is defined totally by the quality of its guests, and it can't be any higher quality than Jay.
Of course.
He also runs the place. So, and we have John Mullen at Promia in San Francisco, a great consultant and thought leader in the world of these murky areas of cyber operations, cyber space, and what the issues might be in that area. We spent the first 2/3 of this particular show talking about that one issue, and we have some understanding, but not a concrete thought to go ahead. But this was just the first thought you had for 2015. You were going to lay a second thought on the table till we interrupted you and got into the details of cyber. Before we lose that second thought, do you think you can go back about 20 minutes and recover it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And-
Okay, here's what it is.
Okay.
I started out with the notion, I've been thinking about this at least for a few days since North Korea, that we're already in, and we should recognize it, a third world war, which is defined differently from all other wars before, namely a cyber war, which will have profound effect on the world, because the world is all connected. But the other thing that I've been thinking about is the war between technology, which is ever so powerful, and the human condition. I think you referred to it as the human condition. Call it morality, call it people, call it doing the right thing. I think we lost contact with John.
Yeah,
We'll
I think
get it
we've
back.
lost John. Going to try to recover it in the studio here.
Yeah. But anyway, so you know, what I wanted to throw at you, Ted, was you know, that sometimes, you know, we always knew this. Sometimes technology works for the good guys, and sometimes it works for the bad guys. We always knew that. That was always the case. Always, way back when. Way back when. But now technology is more powerful than it ever was, and more ubiquitous than it ever was, and can do, you know, some incredible things, both good and bad. And so when we unleash modern technology, when we deploy it around the world, it can be picked up by the bad guys, and it can be used against the human condition, against morality, which makes it nascent, which makes it so much more deadly.
I think about that all the time. I think about you take it all the way back to the time when the first guy picked up a chisel and began making notes on a piece of stone. Somebody probably said, hey, that's good for me, and somebody else probably said, hey, I can use that against you.
Yeah.
And Gutenberg and his printing press, I'm sure that was used in different directions.
Right.
Every time we have some new technology, it always has the balance between the good and the bad. Dynamite, for example, cars, airplanes, whatever. But and there's even the natural side of that. A friend of mine wrote a book about international security called "Rain for the Wicked," and the subject of that book, or the allegory there, was that in the case of a war situation that had been present some years ago, the one side was running out of water, and a rain came, and they thought, oh, this is great, we got rain. But they realized that the opposing army, a half a mile away, was getting the same rain. So even natural events or natural outcomes benefit both sides or harm both sides equally. So that's a really complicated subject, J.L. And I guess what we have to look at how we control those things today. How do we control guns? How do we control high voltage electricity? How do we control all these things that have a significant downside?
The child soldiers in Africa, you know, they have.
We're going to run a technical test of cyber. This was a whole cyber experiment, folks. We're going to see if we have John Mullen back online yet by virtue of the magic of cyber.
I'm
There
here.
he
Look
is,
at that.
there
But
he is.
I think that was a setup job, actually, but that's okay.
Could be
John,
that somebody
welcome back.
was listening to us, you know.
Sony is on this case. The North Koreans are on the case. Somebody is. So, John, what Jay introduced was this thing we think about late at night and don't know what to do with, and that's the issue of how to manage and control technology that has an immediate, obvious benefit to the opposition as much as it has a benefit to us. But again, everything we've dealt with in our historical past, be it weapons, be it construction equipment, dynamite, medicine, the printed word, all these things have a dual usage. So it's really, it's a behavior issue. How do you get people to think in a positive direction and not in the negative direction? And John brought up the point that economics will often have that net result. And he brings up the fact that Russia today is in the situation of its dependence on the price of oil. And as the price of oil's declined 50%, suddenly there's a behavior change that's going to occur here. And they got to be very careful to avoid getting cut further out of the equation. Did we just lose John again?
No, I'm here, I think. I'm
Okay,
here.
we just
No,
minimized
no,
it, but
no.
John's here. So this issue, John, have you seen this being dealt with in the organizations you deal with in the world of cyber? How we think about managing, controlling, regulating for the good?
Well, the one thing that we've been working on a lot is privacy, and there's a group called Privacy by Design, and they're pushing hard to get privacy controls in all software so that privacy can't be abused, or maybe can't be easily abused by people in authority or different ranks. So that's a good, I think, start. But as far as as far as trying to get a global morality, it's kind of hard because we've got different groups in the world that have different value systems, and try to find a value system like nonviolence that protects most people. That's really a common kind of goal, but no one's been able to do that for thousands of years. So I think we're carrying this stuff with us.
Well, I think we've made weapons, which, modern weapons are highly technological. I mean, guns, for example, available everywhere. Gun running is everywhere in the world, and every nation, whatever their principles are, has the opportunity to get guns and weapons like that. Child soldiers in Africa using modern AK-47s, that's very scary, because they're, not necessarily, controlled by moral considerations. The problem is that now technology is more than guns. Technology is more powerful than guns. The internet, whether it works or doesn't work, that's a more powerful weapon than a gun would be. And if I bring down your city, that's a weapon.
And as you point out from an earlier part of the conversation, the concept of win and loss and this sort of thing is a lot less clear than it was, say, in World War II or something, where win and lose was quite obvious. What we were doing, the reason we had this conversation was to get our arms around what we should talk about, who we should bring in as guests, what subjects we should carry forth on in 2015 to make this time, this opportunity, this media through you, Jay, to better understand these issues and better prepare and better get better participation by people in this future, kind of design the future type of an approach. So I think I've been totally motivated here to think that cyber as an underlying factor, for good or for bad, for what, as poorly or as well as understood as it may be, is something we should have as a sort of a subtle undertone to the entire year's worth of discussions on here. Whether we're talking about disaster preparedness, whether we're talking about UAVs, and which I'm sure we'll talk about many times here, it's in my blood, it's in your blood, whether we talk about the technology at the university, even promotion of legislative funding in order to generate capability here in Hawaii, business in Hawaii for that matter. And as John points out, the isolation aspects mandate that we spend more time thinking about these kind of issues. So I would say that we look at 2015 as the several high rocks in the river we've spoken of before, but the river itself is the river of cyber. And that continually flowing, evolving, flooding, and sometimes drying up analogy here of how do we get our arms around that? How do we get that river to flow smoothly and do only work for the good?
We break it down, just like John was saying. You take one level of it and you look at that, take another level and look at that, and each one deserves a different technology, and each one deserves different strategies and the interposition of a moral approach. And so it's not easy. It's very complex. It's more complex. The stakes are higher now than they ever were. This is going to be a long year, Ted.
Mm-hmm. It is. Thanks, Jay. I do think we have, in Hawaii in particular, we have a really strong organization through HARP, which is the Disaster Preparedness Group. We'll get some of them back on this program. We have a change coming in the National Guard. We need to influence that in the right direction. We need to use this show as a way to get that information together and get it out to people. And we'll get some HARP people. I think we've had some plans for them coming up in the near term here. At this point, if we can think about that then as the river of cyber underlying our approach to 2015, bring people in, guests, and propose or talk about subjects, propose solutions, and just see where it goes. Where the road leads, it leads to the future, that we know. Exactly what that future is and how you measure it and how you direct it is a challenge that faces all of us. As we close here, as 2015 begins, I want to thank you, Jay, for the opportunity to be sitting here in this very interesting and highly profitable enterprise.
Profitable?
Profitable,
Or
right.
non-profitable, in the fullest
Non-profitable,
extent of the word.
You're right, yeah. We don't invest anything here, folks. And John, thank you for being a guest again on this show. We'll look forward to you a lot. We'll see you in a month up in San Francisco at GIFIX. And we'll continue bringing that experience that we learned at GIFIX, which is talking about these interdependencies in a sort of a global supply chain from intelligence all the way to logistics. And we'll continue bringing that experience into this table and getting other people in. But thank you, John, for the past, and thank you in advance for participating in the future. Let me just ask, at great risk, Jay to give his final views on your thoughts for today of what you would like the people who listen to this or watch this to take away with them, and then ask John the same thing.
Well, compliments to you on running a great show, Ted.
Oh, thank you, Jay.
It was a good show. It was a good show.
Can you sign my performance appraisal right here?
And it'll be better, next year, or rather this coming year, even better because of your, your sense of curiosity and innovation. But let me say this: this is not just 2015 and New Year. I think it's clear from this discussion and many others here in ThinkTech, this is a new chapter, and it begins now.
Okay, thank you very much, Jay, for those nice words and that great thought. John, your thoughts on what people should take away from this conversation?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity of being here. I think you hit the nail on the head, and for suggestions of people to bring in, you might want to look at some of the people that are really pushing forward on the freedom areas, some of the people that are pushing forward on the control areas, and kind of get a little bit of perspective from each one. But primarily, I think from your point of view, folks in Hawaii, the HARP group and some of the emergency preparedness groups, and as you had before, the InfraGard gentleman we had before, those kinds of views, I think, are very important to your particular listening group here. And as far as going forward, we've got to do everything we can to prepare to do better defense. Jay, I think there are some emerging technologies that will do some of the things you called out of kind of a better holistic kind of support. We'll see them as they come online.
Thank you very much, John. And to our viewers, thank you very much for participating on day one of the work year of 2015. And Jay, thanks for being on, and John as well.
Thank you,
See
Ted.
you next
Thank
Friday.
you, John.
Bye.